An armed robbery occurs every 90 minutes in Australia, and like a homicide, investigators rely on forensic evidence to help them catch the culprits. For members of the armed offender squad who worked on this case, the evidence found was unusual and its combination unique, just like the actions of the thieves themselves.
Just before 10 o'clock, an armed cash carrier van arrived outside a disused bank in Flemington, an inner-suburban location of Melbourne, where guards were tasked to refill 2 automatic teller machines in a bunker inside that disused bank. Once the 2 guards had finished their security checks, Mohammed took up a position outside the bank to scan the street, while Rebecca retrieved 2 carry bags containing the money to use to refill the ATM machines.
And it was at this time, as she was just entering the disused bank, that Mohammed had seen to his right 2 men jump out of the back of a red-coloured ute. These 2 people were armed with firearms and wearing balaclavas. The driver was able to see in his mirrors the 2 offenders jumping out of the ute as well. He was aware instantly that these 2 men were there to rob them. He's then immediately driven from the scene, radioed his base, and provided them with the details of the armed robbery as it was being committed. Both Rebecca and Mohammed then ran into the bank, into the bunker room, and in their haste, haven't been in a position to lock the door.
Give me the fucking money!
The door to the bunker was flung open.
Give me the fucking money now!
A shot was fired, first by one of the offenders.
Give me the fucking money now, come on!
And threats and demands were made for the money that was inside the bunker in the carry bags. Mohammed then returned fire in self-defence, as did Rebecca.
Give me the money before you get...
During the exchange of gunfire, the offenders were trying to reach inside the bunker to take the carry bags of cash. One of the bullets passed so close to Mohammed's head that he felt the shockwave and the heat of the bullet passing. It was at that point in time, Mohammed was in little doubt that he was going to die.
Mohammed realised that he was down to 1 round left in his firearm. He realised that on the next opportunity that the offender presented himself, he was going to fire upon him.
You fucking die!
There was silence in the bank, and Mohammed took this opportunity to reload his firearm. Then, one of the offenders screamed out, "You're going to die for this, boy, you're going to die."
You're gonna die, boy! Give me the money! Give me the fucking money now!
The offender reaches around the bunker room door again. Rebecca recalls seeing a yellow rigger's glove reach for the cash satchel. She takes aim and fires upon the offender, believing that she hits him.
There was a short pause, and it appeared to the guards that both offenders had left. They ran out the front, in time to see the red ute driving down Racecourse Road. Mohammed tried to get the registration number, but it was too far ahead of him.
550 update, we got 2 offenders at least with handguns. We believe the offender was shot twice, we believe in the forearm. Roger.
The forensic team were immediately called in. If the offender had been shot, then his calling card may have been left behind.
Outside the bank, there was 2 pieces of wood located on the roadway. Those pieces of wood had a small amount of blood on them. There was also a small amount of blood on the tiles directly outside the bank as well. I collected swabs of that blood for DNA analysis, hopefully to identify the offender.
It was pretty clear to us that it was committed by people who have committed like crimes before, and we're hoping that whoever had committed the crime had been profiled and their blood was on the database.
As they waited for those results, the detectives followed more immediate leads.
A witness was actually riding his bicycle along Racecourse Road at the time of the armed robbery, and he saw 2 men wearing balaclavas and with guns run into the disused bank. This man actually believed there was a movie being made and went to investigate. He crossed Racecourse Road, went outside the bank and tried to look inside to see what was going on with this movie. Unfortunately, the sunlight glare on the glass didn't enable him to see inside the bank, but he heard a further number of gunshots. He then became a bit dubious as to whether, in fact, this was a movie or a real-life offence. He then moved away from the front of the bank, and as he did so, the two offenders fled the bank on foot, ran to the red Ford utility and drove off in Racecourse Road. This man obtained the registration number of the Ford utility.
Yeah, Flemington 252. I'll give a description of the vehicle. A red Ford Ute, Delta Victor Charlie 574.
A quick check unsurprisingly discovered that the red Ute had been stolen. And within minutes, it had been found. But would there be enough forensic evidence left to catch their violent offenders?
Police are on the lookout for a gunman shot during an armed robbery this morning. $150,000 in cash was stolen when two balaclava-clad bandits ambushed guards during a routine delivery to refill a teller machine.
The shots all occurred inside the bank, so there was no risk to passer-bys, but it's certainly dangerous and a brazen attempt by the offenders.
I was notified by the crime scene unit to attend the scene of a shooting at an armed hold-up in Flemington. On arrival, I found that the scene literally looked like the shootout at the OK Corral.
Give me the money, boy!
There were 14 impact marks located within the area of the bank, and based on the damage left by the impact and the location of the two security officers and the two offenders, it was possible to determine that 6 shots had been fired by the male security guard, 4 shots had been fired by the female security guard, and 4 shots had been fired by the offender's revolver, 2 in the concrete floor, and a further 2 shots fired into the bunker, 1 striking the ATM machine and the other striking the wall above the head of the male security officer.
But when the crime scene examiners collected the cartridges and bullets in the bank, it accounted for 16 shots.
That left 2 shots unaccounted for. It is possible that those 2 bullets have struck an offender and those bullets remained within the body or passed through to be caught up within the clothing.
The injured offender, who had left drops of blood on the footpath outside the bank, had escaped with his associate in a red Ute, and that vehicle had just been found.
416, we found the car. That's on fire in Mulgrave Street.
30.500, we've got at least 3 to 4 witnesses here who've chased the offenders.
When we arrived at Mulgrave Street, at that secondary scene, we were approached by a witness who stated he was driving along Racecourse Road at the time the armed robbery was being committed. He stated he saw the 2 offenders leaving the bank and jumping into the red Ute. It was then that he decided to do a U-turn and began to follow this vehicle. He followed the red Ute into Eastwood Street and then into Mulgrave Street. And at one stage he actually thought about ramming that vehicle, but seeing the guns, he thought better of it. He then saw the red Ute crash into the fence post. He was able to see the taller one getting into the back tray. One of the offenders at this stage had taken his balaclava off, but the witness was too far away to actually get any sort of detailed description. He then saw the shorter offender pour liquid all over it and then set the vehicle alight. The offender returned and reached into the back of the now burning Ute and grabbed out what the witness described as a bag or something similar. So he then watched in amazement as this man ran off down the laneway carrying a bag with one hand and trying to put out the fire with the other.
We've got 2 male offenders on foot who've headed south down the laneway off Mulgrave Street.
It was clear that it was the intention of the offenders to deliberately light the fire in an attempt to destroy all forensic evidence. But unfortunately for them, the fire wasn't that successful. There were several clues left to investigators, being the wardrobe that was partially burnt and the 3 firearms in the ute. I think it was not the intention of the offenders to leave these firearms in the utility. It was the sheer panic and the injuries sustained by one of the offenders during the armed robbery, where they've cleanly forgotten to take the firearms with them.
610 Portable, we've got a trail of blood down the laneway. Permission from the 250 unit to follow that blood trail instead of waiting for a dog received.
Roger, Flemington 252, go.
252, permission granted.
2 bits south of the ute, where it had crashed into a fence, there was a laneway. The laneway ran through to Smith Street. In that laneway, there was a blood trail that indicated one fender had been bleeding, and the amount of blood and the nature of it indicated that the offender had a substantial wound. We collected samples of that blood for subsequent DNA analysis. The blood trail ended abruptly at Smith Street, indicating that a further getaway vehicle may have been used.
There's a pool of blood. It looks like they stopped here for a split second and maybe stolen another car.
On the day of the robbery, we were contacted by the Armed Offenders Squad. I was asked to attend an address in Smith Street, Flemington. A witness had seen the 2 offenders running down a laneway and getting into a car outside a house.
I've got a basic description of both those males.
16, go.
One's around 185 centimetres tall.
She told me that she'd seen 2 males. One of them had a balaclava on. The other male had nothing on his face, and she saw his face quite clearly.
Second male, about 173 centimetres tall, thinnish to medium build. He was late 30s to 40s with short, straight, dark-coloured hair.
I then conducted an interview with her to create a facial image of this male that was not wearing the balaclava. We produced the face, piecing it together like a jigsaw puzzle. We'll start off with the most distinctive feature of the face that the witness can remember, whether it be a hairstyle, a jaw shape, and we will then build that jigsaw puzzle together until we come up with a complete image.
Creating the face image could take between 1 hour and a day. And so another significant observation by the witness was out on the police airwaves.
All units, call has come through. Description of second vehicle that has been stolen. Registration is similar to Oscar Double Victor 442. Described as a white Holden Commodore mid-80s. Retro comes up to expired 83 Mitsubishi sedan from a car yard in Benalla.
So then we started to wonder whether the plates had actually been stolen or the details that we'd been given were actually incorrect at the time. That led us to make a number of further inquiries and run variations of the number plates in relation to the numbers and letters that had been provided. As a result of these inquiries, it led to the discovery of a station wagon that had been stolen from the Middle Park area approximately 3 weeks earlier with the registration QVV 442.
The mistake, though minor, had meant the offenders were well ahead of the police. But they had picked the wrong car to steal and the wrong exit to escape. Within minutes of the robbery, the detectives knew they were dealing with professionals. But in stealing the $150,000 cash, one had been injured. Police now had alerts in local hospitals and were actively seeking the whereabouts of the second getaway vehicle.
In the hours following the armed robbery, we released a whereabouts desired in relation to the stolen Holden station wagon, QVV 442. One of the avenues of inquiry that actually produced some information for investigators was an e-tag system on the new tollway in Melbourne, whereby a vehicle is fitted with a tag and it pings off a gantry on the roadway and they pay a toll. In the event that a car doesn't have an E-tag, it's recorded that the vehicle has passed the tollway without paying the appropriate fee. In this instance, we established that the Holden Commodore station wagon had travelled on the Balti Bridge along the tollway and had been captured by camera because they had not paid the appropriate fee.
Only 10 minutes after the robbery, the offenders had entered the tollway, and this road fed to a number of outer suburban areas. So as local patrols kept a lookout for the second stolen vehicle, the first was being inspected.
At this point in the inquiry, we were no closer to identifying who the offenders were responsible for that armed robbery. We returned to the yard where the stolen Ford utility had been secured to examine that for evidence that may have been in the vehicle that will assist us in identifying who the offenders are. When we got to the Ford utility, we identified there was rope and a pair of rigger's gloves we believed to be worn by the offenders during the commission of the armed robbery. And when we spoke to the owner of the red Ford utility, the owner identified to us that a number of wheels and tyres that had been in the car when it was stolen were no longer there, and also told us that remnants of a burnt wardrobe that were in the back of the utility did not belong to him.
We re-canvassed the neighbours from where the cars were stolen from. We weren't able to turn up anything else to enlighten us to the identity of the offenders involved.
However, the guns that had been left behind in the burning ute were giving them a strong lead.
About a week after the armed robbery, the Ballistics section contacted us and gave us information about the 3 firearms that were found in Mulgrave Street with the utility. They advised us that the 2 firearms, being the 12-gauge shotgun and the .22 rifle, had their serial numbers ground out. What they did tell us was the serial number in the revolver was able to be retrieved, and they linked that to an armed robbery that had been committed in January of 2001.
That was only 5 weeks before the one they were currently investigating.
Security guards and bank customers were forced to the ground at gunpoint last night when thieves robbed an armour guard van in Toorak.
This armed robbery was committed in similar circumstances in the fact that the 2 armed guards were about to do a refill on an ATM in Toorak when they were ambushed by 2 offenders at gunpoint. The guards, during the course of this armed robbery, were forced to the ground and had one of their firearms stolen, as well as the cash that they were about to refill that ATM with.
Once we discovered that the revolver used in the Flemington armed robbery was stolen from a guard in a previous armed robbery, we were confident that we were dealing with offenders who had committed at least one other, if not more, armed robberies prior to the Flemington armed robbery.
Their assumption appeared true. Like the gun, the blood found outside the bank had brought up a connection to another robbery, one that had remained unsolved for 5 years.
The circumstances of that burglary were that 2 offenders had broken in after hours into the shopping centre itself. Had gone to the jewellery shop, broken an internal window and entered into the premises itself. They then smashed several of the display cabinets, and during the course of that, one of the offenders has cut himself. Upon investigating that jewellery burglary, the investigating police member obtained a sample of the blood. The jewellery burglary itself was a reasonably well-planned and executed burglary. A sum of about $50,000 worth of jewellery was taken.
The problem was that while the blood from this jewellery heist and the robbery matched each other, it had not uncovered a criminal from the DNA database. The good news was that the face image had been completed.
We put out a face system of one of the offenders together with a detailed description of the armed robbery to all police in Victoria and to armed robbery investigators in other states of Australia. It wasn't long before information started coming back into us that identified a number of persons of interest.
As a result of the internal email that we'd sent out, which detailed the fact that an offender was injured and may be seeking medical treatment, we received information from our Crime Stoppers and local police in Rye that they had information that a person by the name of Brian Gardner of the Rye area was in fact sourcing medical treatment. Brian Gardner was known to the members of the Armed Offender Squad, although his history mainly consisted of burglaries and lower type offences. In the early stages, he wasn't considered a suspect owing to the escalation and violence of the armed robbery in Flemington. On the receipt of that information from Crime Stoppers in Rye, he became our #1 priority.
When detectives did a check on Gardner's address in Rye, they came up with several alternatives. Each needed to be checked out. But the Armed Offenders Squad had other ideas than simply knocking on each door.
One of the considerations is that the Armed Offenders Squad is searching for a person who is probably armed, is desperate and injured, and has displayed the propensity to use the firearm to prevent apprehension. Because of that, forced entry techniques are used to gain entry to the addresses.
The first premises we searched with our 20-pound key, also known as a sledgehammer, turned up no one was in that premises. Over the course of the next couple of hours, we then searched a number of houses, which again failed to locate Gardner at any of those.
Was it possible that this prime suspect had flown the coop? Had word got out of the squad's arrival? Or did the police have the wrong intelligence? The Armed Offenders Squad had raided several properties in which they believed their prime suspect may be hiding. Each was unsuccessful.
We cordoned off the area of Rye, ensuring that all the entry and exit points to it were covered by Armed Offenders Squad personnel, in case word had got around to Gardner that we were in fact searching for him and he couldn't leave the area and flee. We did have several other known addresses, so we then had those premises set off, and by that I mean we had members from the Armed Offenders Squad conduct surveillance on those premises to see who came and who left.
One of those houses was proving interesting.
The two members were watching the address. They saw a vehicle leave the premises. It contained 2 males. They then followed that vehicle a number of kilometres. The vehicle was intercepted.
They then called upon the occupants of the car to leave the car. Of course, this is done at gunpoint, having consideration for the fact that we believe that one of them may be Brian Gardner and he probably will be armed.
One of the squad members then approached the back of the car where he saw a person to be seen there covered in what appeared to be a white sheet. He was called upon also to get out of the car but stated he couldn't. Again, he was called upon, responding, "I can't, I'm fucked, my arms don't work." The squad member identified this person to be Brian Gardner. We finally caught our man.
So they then secured him and took the sheet off and searched for firearms, which they found none. At that stage, they observed that his injuries consisted of his right arm being in a sling and his left arm all bandaged up. He was then removed from the vehicle and then placed under arrest. The arresting members of Brian Gardner then asked him about how and the circumstances of how he got his injuries, and he explained to them that he was shot through his left arm, which went through. He explained that he was shot in his right arm as well, but he believed that the bullet was still stuck in there and it had broken his bones. He stated to them he had no great plan in regards to getting medical treatment, he just hoped they'd get better. Gardner was then immediately conveyed to the Frankston Hospital, accompanied by 2 members of the Armed Offenders Squad. Whilst being treated at the Frankston Hospital for his injuries, Gardner admitted to the investigating members that he'd been shot by security. He didn't admit any circumstances of the armed robbery, location of the money or who the co-offender was. So at this stage we're back to square one and we needed forensic evidence to link him to the crime.
Investigators obtained a swab from Gardner whilst in hospital, and this would be used to establish a DNA profile of Gardner and hopefully establish whether he was a person who deposited the blood at the crime scene in Flemington.
Brian Gardner then went under surgery and a bullet was removed. It had completely shattered on entry and so would be of no evidential value in the case. So as detectives eagerly waited for results of the DNA tests, the house Gardner was seen leaving was being searched.
As a result of a search on that address, we found numerous painkillers, bandages, and associated items in his bedroom, which he'd clearly been using to treat his injuries. Of significance, we also found a Fat Boy Harley Davidson in the lounge room. This bike appeared brand new, which showed to us that he'd come into some recent wealth. We then questioned his wife about that, and she said that they'd loaned a sum of about $25,000 to purchase that Harley Davidson. Again, we found this strange in the circumstances.
We spoke with the previous owner of the motorcycle and obtained an amount of information from him. He told us that Gardner had tendered at his home address to buy the Harley Davidson some 2 weeks before the armed robbery. Gardner had paid a small deposit and told the owner of the motorcycle that he didn't have all the money but would get it shortly, and when he did, he would return and complete the sale of the motorcycle. Gardner then left. A couple of days after the armed robbery, Gardner's wife went back to where the Harley Davidson motorcycle was and again spoke to the owner and paid cash, a total of about $25,000 in $50 notes to the owner of the motorcycle. In conversation, in passing, Gardner's wife did mention to the owner that she couldn't wait to get it back to the home address so that Gardner would feel better when he saw it.
So with the discovery of the bike, that explained at least $25,000 from the armed robbery. We still had a sum of money still outstanding. At this stage, we still had no idea where or what he had done with that money.
In a bedside hearing, Gardner was charged with attempted murder, armed robbery and the theft of vehicles. And it wasn't long before that news was heard on the grapevine.
The night of Brian Gardner's arrest turned out to be busier than expected. Investigators were notified later that evening that the vehicle that they were still searching for, the white Holden station wagon, had been located at the back of the bank in the rear car park, partially burnt out.
It wasn't possible that the vehicle had been abandoned there before this night. This area was regularly patrolled. It's a very common area, which is patrolled by the local police on a fairly regular basis. We were quite happy with the fact that it was left there that night.
There were two trains of thinking at this point in time. It was either the offender had thought that he had to get rid of all evidence still in his possession at this point in time, or it was a clear taunt to police, catch me if you can.
Are you Brian Gardner? Are you Brian Gardner? Yes.
Brian Gardner was currently under police guard in hospital. So too was the white station wagon that had been used as a getaway vehicle in the armed robbery. It had just been found, dumped and partially burnt.
Inside the station wagon, we found a number of tyres, pieces of wood. I found pieces of wood that had a floral pattern on them and some money boxes. The money boxes were the kind of boxes that are used to fill auto tellers, and they had labels indicating they were for the Flemington auto tellers. A large vinyl bag was also found in the rear of the car, and that was what the money boxes would have been normally been carried in. In the front passenger area of the car, we located a substantial amount of blood, which indicated that the person who had been sitting there had bled quite severely. I took a DNA swab of that blood for further analysis.
We formed the belief that the blood would have been put there by Brian Gardner as he sat in the passenger seat, being driven by his co-offender from the Flemington area after the armed robbery. We took the owner of the station wagon to view the property in the station wagon to identify what, if any, of the property was his. He told us that the parts of the wardrobe, the wheels and tyres, and the tins and bag certainly were not his.
As well as having the owner of the stolen station wagon examine his vehicle, we had the owner of the stolen ute come and attend as well. He stated to us that the tyres that were in the back of the station wagon were the ones, in fact, that were in his ute when it was stolen.
The unsuccessful lighting of the fire meant that police now had a direct link between the two stolen vehicles. There was also the likelihood that the blood from the crime scene, the blood now found in the wagon, and the mouth swab from Gardner would all match. But as yet, there were no links or clues to his co-offender.
We're still no closer to identifying who the second offender was. We're then going through a process of eliminating a list of persons of interest, or including them in the inquiry when we received a phone call from the Alternate Police Station. A person by the name of Michael Coates had presented himself to the police station, saying the armed offender squad wanted to talk to him about the armed robbery in Flemington.
We thought this was unusual. Why would someone present themselves to the police station if they had no knowledge of the armed robbery? It was a very curious thing for us and obviously something we had to explore.
On arrival at Altona North Police Station, I observed that Michael Coates was quite similar to both the build described and the face image provided by the witness from Flemington. As a result, Michael Coates was placed under arrest in the event that any admissions he's made could be produced in court at a later date.
I intend to interview you in relation to the offence of armed robbery. Before continuing, I must inform you that you're not obliged to say or do anything, but anything you say or do may be given in evidence. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do.
During the formal interview of Michael Coates, the clear question to me was, why had he come to police? During this interview process, he said he'd read a newspaper article that a man had been injured during an armed robbery in Flemington. The man had been located in the Rye area and had gunshot wounds.
Now, I am a suspicious person by nature, and I thought it might be someone I know, and thought, well, if it is, you'll be around to see me. No one came around to see me. Someone came round at 9 o'clock this morning and said that you people were after me, so I came to see you.
That person, was that a police officer?
No.
Okay, just so we're not speaking in riddles and we understand, the newspaper article, who did you, in your own mind, who did you think that person to be?
No comment.
Okay, Mike, I'd just like to put some allegations to you in relation to why you have been arrested. It's alleged that on the 25th of January 2002, an armed robbery took place at the disused Commonwealth Bank complex. Flemington, what can you tell me about that?
No comment.
Did you have any involvement in the commission of that armed robbery?
No comment.
Do you know any person that did have any involvement in that armed robbery?
No comment.
Michael, is it your intention to answer no comment to the rest of my questions in relation to that armed robbery?
Correct.
I was somewhat baffled that this person had presented himself to a police station, saying that we wanted to speak to them and that he would answer questions, then exercising his right to not answer those questions.
I just couldn't work out why this man presented himself, then wanted to play cat and mouse with us. It was really quite strange at the time.
I'll move on in relation to some questions in relation to forensic procedures.
We asked him if he would present his arm so we could do an inspection to see if there was any evidence available that would be consistent with that of the second offender. As he's rolled up the cardigan arm to his right arm, lo and behold, we find a burn mark that's consistent with that of the second offender may have received when he was reaching into the rear of the utility to get the cash bag out of the car. He said he'd received it during a sanding accident during the repair of a motor vehicle. We organised for the forensic medical officer to come in and to view that injury, and she said that it was consistent with a recent burn. We couldn't believe Michael Coates could be so stupid to present himself. He now fitted the description and had an injury consistent with the second offender.
Police had two suspects. Gardner, who admitted being shot, but not admitting that he had been at the armed robbery. And now Michael Coates, who had turned himself in, but hadn't. So in this cat and mouse game, they needed to find solid evidence. Luckily for police, Coates had driven in that day.
Michael Coates also gave me the keys to his car, and when I searched the car, I found in the glove box of the car a lease agreement to an address in Lock Street, Yarraville. Of particular interest in this lease agreement were the dates on the lease agreement. They extended prior to and just after the armed robbery committed in Flemington. The real estate agent also supplied us with information relating to the lease agreement, and on that lease agreement, Brian Gardner was noted as a referee of Michael Coates.
Michael Coates had just walked into a police station, saying that the armed offenders squad were looking for him. They weren't, but his appearance had now led them to search a house he had rented during the period that the armed robbery had occurred.
We then searched the premises in Lock Street, Yarraville. We found a number of significant items in that premises, things including blood staining on the floor near the back door, a pair of blood-stained tennis shoes, bandages which appeared to be blood-stained in the lounge and living areas of that premises. And of significance, we found a cupboard, and in that cupboard was a very distinctive green patterned floral adhesive, which matched that of the wardrobes and cupboards we recovered from the stolen station wagon.
Not only were the shelves a link between the house and the White Commodore, but forensic investigators were also finding links between the house, the White Commodore and the ute.
When I compared the property located in both of the stolen vehicles, the ute and the station wagon, there were remnants of wardrobe in both. There was a particular type of hinge found in both of the vehicles, having a U shape and also being painted white over green. The same design was used for both hinges. It showed that they were probably from the same era and possibly even from the same cabinet.
In the laneway, not far from the house, there was further evidence. More remnants of a wardrobe, the frame of which was identical to that from the ute. And if there was any doubt these discarded wooden items didn't belong to the property, the owners of the house were about to put a stop to that.
They were able to tell us that they had 3 cupboards missing. The same 3 cupboards had the distinctive green floral pattern adhesive on them. Those wardrobes in particular belonged to that address. That address at the time being rented by Michael Coates had all married up together.
And the links didn't stop there.
In the garage, which was attached to the rear of the premises, we found a piece of rope. That rope was immediately recognisable as being the same kind that we recovered in the back of the red ute.
This rope had the same dimensions and the same twist and structure as the rope from the ute. So therefore, I could conclude that it was likely that they may have originated from the same source.
Also in the garage were tyre impressions. One perfectly matched the tyre tread found on the White Commodore station wagon. But this car wasn't the only one linked to the property.
Members of the Armed Offenders Squad canvassed residents in Lock Street, Yarraville, and from that they identified a number of witnesses. One of whom observed a gold-coloured Ford Fairlane sedan parked at the front of the Lock Street address in the days prior to and after the armed robbery in Flemington. It was also seen that a person had retrieved what appeared to be a gun case from the back of the Ford Fairlane and taken it inside the Lock Street address. Of significance, the person described was not dissimilar in appearance to Brian Gardner. Brian Gardner had in fact owned a 1979 Ford Fairlane sedan and it was gold in colour.
As a further part of checking the surrounding area of Lock Street, Yarraville, we came across a medical centre. We established that Michael Coates had in fact been to that location on several occasions post the armed robbery. And received several scripts for painkillers. That was significant to us for the fact that it was pretty clear that those painkillers were bought in an effort to assist Gardner who'd been shot.
Brian Gardner and Michael Coates were definitely linked to the house. But more importantly, when the DNA results came back from Gardner's mouth swab, it was a perfect match to items in the house, to the blood in the White Commodore, to the laneway near where the ute had been burnt, and outside the bank.
Brian Gardner had already been arrested and charged for the armed robbery and attempted murder of the 2 security guards. The blood sealed the case. Michael Coates, on the other hand, had been charged only as an accessory, but that was about to change.
Having obtained all the evidence we had from Lock Street and the associated evidence, we then attended at the Smith Street address and spoke to the witness who saw the unmasked offender on the day of the armed robbery in question. We showed her a series of photographs in which she was able to identify positively Michael Coates as being the person she saw in the laneway on the day of that armed robbery. We now had significant evidence to link Michael Coates to his involvement in the commission of that armed robbery.
We then went out to the Mount Street address, rearrested him and took him to the office of the Armed Offenders Squad, where we gave him the opportunity to explain his actions if he wished to do so.
Okay, Michael, it's alleged that you and the company with Brian Gardner attended at the disused bank, whereby you confronted 2 armoured guard employees doing an automatic telling machine refill. What do you have to say to that?
Wasn't, mate.
It's also alleged, Michael, that during these gunfight, that a quantity of cash in the vicinity of $150,000 was stolen from the guards at this time. What do you have to say to that?
I know nothing about that.
It's further alleged, Michael, that during this time you have fled with Gardner to a stolen Ford utility, red in colour, that was parked out the front of the branch, registration DVC 574. What do you have to say to that?
No, it wasn't me.
This armed robbery was clearly well planned and well executed until the point where Brian Gardner was shot. At that point in time, things went tragically wrong. Their escape didn't go smoothly. They crashed the red utility, they set that on fire, they leave the guns behind. Initially, they leave the money behind. Michael Coates catches himself on fire. It all went wrong. They weren't in a position to dispose of the secondary vehicle. They had to hang on to that. Nothing went right from the time that they left the bank.
Michael Coates was informally charged with armed robbery, attempted murder and theft in relation to the 2 cars used in the armed robbery and of the $150,000 stolen during the course of the armed robbery. He was then remanded in custody to spend time with Brian Gardner.
Do you wish to say anything in answer to the charge?
No comment.
Do you wish to make a further statement in relation to this matter?
No.
I really have no reason why Michael Coates contacted police on the day when he presented himself at Altona North. There's obviously several schools of thought. One was that he was that arrogant that he believed that whatever we were able to find out would never be able to link him to the case in question. It still baffles me, and I'm sure sitting where he is now, he'll have a lot of time to think about it. But it certainly was his undoing by presenting himself to the police on that day.
At their trial, both men contested the attempted murder charge. But Gardner, unlike his co-accused, pleaded guilty to the armed robbery and the theft of the vehicles. They were found guilty of those 2 charges, but acquitted on the attempted murder.
Gardner was sentenced to 8 years imprisonment and Coates was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. The Victorian Director of Public Prosecutions later appealed the leniency of these sentences, and the appeal was upheld, and new sentences of 11 years was imposed with a non-parole period of 8 years. Both Coates and Gardner are eligible for parole in the year 2010.
Gardner was charged with the jewellery burglary, where he pleaded guilty and received a 12-month term of imprisonment. Unfortunately, we weren't able to produce enough evidence for the Turek armed robbery, and that case remains open.
The 2 security guards involved in the Flemington armed robbery have left their jobs. Brian Gardner, who caused them to be so traumatised, has, as a result of his actions, been left with a damaged right arm. He may never be able to ride a Harley again. The remainder of the money is still missing.
Today, when you hear the word piracy, you think of unauthorised use of copyrighted material. In this case, detectives were looking for pirates in the bays around Brisbane. It was a curious start to an investigation, and one that would go deeper than the waters in which it began.
Around about 3 o'clock in the morning, the air-sea rescue boat got called out to an unknown medical emergency on board a boat somewhere in the bay. And it was pitch black. We're just shining spotlights everywhere trying to find this boat that was supposed to be in distress. It took us about half an hour before we actually located it. The boat was in total darkness. There was no navigation lights whatsoever on the boat. Then the lights caught a lady standing on the back of the boat.
Hello, are you okay over there?
The skipper called out to her and asked if she had a medical emergency on board. She replied yes.
Hey, sweetie, what's been happening?
I jumped over onto the Misty Blue and I asked her what had happened. She said someone must have boarded the boat and I must have been hit very hard and got knocked out from it.
What's your name, darling?
Trisha Byers.
When I went down the steps into the cabin, I saw a man lying on the left-hand side on the bunk. There was quite a bit of blood around. The patient was fully conscious. I asked him what happened, and he said to me that someone had boarded the boat. He heard the female call out, and that's when he got a start, and he jumped up, and that's when he must have hit his head.
Yeah, VKR, we've located Misty Blue. We have 2 injured persons on board, and we're about to take the vessel in tow. We'll be back at our base in approximately 15 minutes.
The man and his partner were immediately taken to hospital, where the local police attended.
On our arrival, we saw John Asquith and Patricia Byers. John was being treated by medical staff for a head injury. Both of them looked tired, but they were relatively calm in their dealings with us and at a little bit at a loss as to what has actually happened to them. While John was being treated, we tried to ascertain what happened during the evening. Patricia had stated that they'd been travelling out on Moreton Bay earlier the previous afternoon when the boat broke down with a fuel filter problem. She decided that they'd anchor up in the channel and stay there the night.
Looking good.
It is.
Almost as good as you.
Oh, yeah.
You like that?
They had a romantic evening. They had dinner. They drank 2 bottles of wine, half a bottle of port. They'd both showered out on the back of the vessel in the nude and went to bed.
Wake up.
The next thing she can recall is laying there naked, curled across the front of the boat.
What's wrong?
John with blood over his face, bending over asking if she was all right. They both then retired to the inside of the boat, at which time John has begun an hour and a half of calling for help over the radio.
But it appeared John's wound was not a result of a bump to the head, but something more sinister.
The doctor, he told me from his experience of treating injuries that it appeared to be a bullet wound. And we looked at John and at Patricia Byers, and they all but laughed off the idea as to how ridiculous is that. One would think that if a person was shot in the head, that you would know about it.
When X-rays were carried out, metal fragments to a depth of 7 centimetres were found in John's skull. He had been shot, and detectives were brought in to find out who shot him and why.
We then went to the PA hospital to speak with John and also to speak with Patricia in relation to what happened. We couldn't find Patricia, she wasn't at the hospital. So it was imperative for us at that time to find her.
There was 2 scenarios. People had either got on the boat and assaulted her and shot John, or there had only been the 2 of them on the boat. Somebody must have had a firearm on that boat. Now, whether it was Patricia or John or other people, that's what we were trying to establish.
Police were looking for Patricia Byers, the only witness they had to what may have occurred on the Misty Blue. She wasn't at the hospital, where an X-ray had just confirmed her partner had been shot. Nor was she at home.
Once we got to the house, there was no one there, and in the meantime, we'd been contacted by the hospital that Patricia had turned up to see John. We spoke with Patricia, asked her what had happened. She told us a story that pirates had come on board and attacked John. She told us that he'd been shot in the head, or the pirates had shot him in the head.
However, Patricia Byers had never mentioned this when she first spoke to the police. Her lack of such an important detail was an immediate concern.
She was asked, was there any firearms on the boat? And she said no.
She was then asked, did she have any firearms? And she replied yes, that she had 2 firearms at home and there was also one at the business.
And we asked her if she'd be prepared to come back to her house, let us search the house for firearms. She took us through the house, basically, and showed us where the air rifle was. She then gave us a .22 rifle which had a scope on it.
She was quite helpful and didn't appear to be worried in any way about the consequences of taking her weapons from her. She used to operate a fishing trawler and she used to use the firearms to shoot sharks, and also she had some pet parrots on their property, and cats used to come and attack the parrots and she used to shoot at cats.
She also took them to the business that she and John operated, where another weapon, a 10-gauge shotgun, was confiscated.
After collecting the firearms with Patricia, we asked her was she prepared to come back to the police station to be interviewed on audio and video. She said no, but she would talk to us off tape. We asked her was she prepared to undergo a test on her hands to establish whether she had fired a firearm recently or to eliminate her. This was purely voluntary for her, and she was not compelled to undergo that test in any way, and she declined to undergo that test.
She also said that she just wanted to get back and see John at the hospital, so we then took her back.
Meanwhile, the Misty Blue had become a crime scene.
We've gone inside the cabin of the boat. The left-hand side, the port side, was where John had been laying. We noticed in the V section between the 2 bunks, there was a quantity of dried blood in the floor well. And on the right-hand side, the starboard side, there was the blood splash pattern and also splashed up on the cushion. And on an examination of the dried blood, we found small fragments of metal consistent with that of a splatter from a bullet, as well as on the wall of the bulkhead, which we took possession of for forensic examination.
When these fragments, along with those from John's skull, were examined microscopically, they were found to be gilded.
Because they had gilding material adhering to them, this would indicate that it's most likely a .22 calibre weapon which has fired this projectile. That firearm was recovered by detectives and brought to police for further examination. However, in this case, the pieces of projectile were damaged to such a great extent that there was no markings on them which could be used to match it back to an individual firearm.
So Patricia's .22 calibre rifle with a telescopic lens could not be ruled in or ruled out. And at this stage, neither could her story about pirates.
Well, I don't know of any pirates in Moreton Bay. It could have been a valid story. We had to confirm or deny her story. There was nothing missing from the boat. Radios were on board, all the fishing gear, barbecue, that was all on board. Even John's wallet was still on board. There was nothing taken whatsoever. And then if you're talking about pirates, they would be going on board to take something. So the only options that could have happened on the boat were that John had tried to shoot himself, although very unlikely because where the bullet was in the top of his head, there was no physical way that a person could hold a long rifle back and shoot themselves in the head. Another option that we did have, which was that Patricia was the one that shot him. The only other option is that it could have been a domestic fight on the boat and things had gone bad, and subsequently John had been shot in the head somehow.
Once John was sufficiently recovered to be interviewed, we went to the hospital and spoke to him.
We made a decision to take the weapons up to John to make sure that they were the guns that were in the house.
He identified the shotgun and said that that was the one from the shop. He identified the air rifle and said that was the one from home. However, with the .22 rifle, he said he had never seen that before. We asked him why was he so positive he had not seen this .22 calibre rifle before, and he said it was quite simple. The one that they had at home didn't have a telescopic sight. So immediately that raised a suspicion in our mind. We suggested to John that maybe Patricia had shot him. He was totally aghast at that suggestion and said that no way in the world that could never have happened. As far as he was concerned, they had a very good relationship and there was no problems whatsoever. He was of the opinion that somebody must have come on the boat and had assaulted both him and Patricia.
John Asquith had most probably been shot by a .22 calibre weapon. Police had ruled out pirates and an attempted suicide. Suspicion was now with his partner, Patricia. One of the guns she had presented to police was a .22 calibre rifle. But it wasn't the calibre that had caused the concern, but the fact that John had not recognised the weapon.
We did a check of that weapon and found that it had been purchased at a gun shop in Beenleigh the same day or that afternoon when John Asquith had been taken to the PA hospital. I then went down to the Beenleigh gun shop. He showed us his records and the documents said that the gun had been purchased by Patricia. She'd paid $100 or something for the weapon. The owner did say that she said she wanted a .22 without a scope. The only one he had at the time was the weapon that we had, which had a scope. He did say to her that the scope could be taken off.
And he remembered that she also had to go to an automatic teller to get some money to pay for it.
From there, we took out a search warrant to get bank details from Patricia. She'd gone to the ATM, which is straight across the road from the gun shop, got the money out, walked across and purchased the gun. We could definitely say that, yes, she had bought that gun from that shop that afternoon. We knew then that's why she wasn't at the hospital to see John, because she was out buying a gun, because she knew, obviously, that we would do a search on the house and would be asking for the weapons. So we were then looking for the fourth gun, the old .22.
The blood-smeared half-cabin runabout was towed to Manly for a thorough police examination. The 53-year-old victim, John Asquith of Yatala, had been shot at point-blank range. A 46-year-old woman had also been on board. It's understood the pair had been drinking for some hours.
The boat was supposedly broken down and moored in the channel.
Water police are now questioning boaties who were in the area at the time of the shooting. This afternoon, police divers began a search of the area where the boat was moored. It's believed they're looking for a .22 calibre rifle.
Our immediate thought was maybe the rifle was discarded over the side of the boat in Moreton Bay. However, with the tide and the currents and the movements of the ocean, nothing was able to be located.
If Patricia Byers was responsible for shooting her partner John, then they needed to find a motive. First stop was their relationship.
All family and friends said that they had a good relationship together. They got on well, there wasn't any problems, they were in business together. They seemed like a happy couple.
Everyone we had spoken to had said that it was a good relationship, there was no fighting, they'd never fought. They were going along the lines that they would probably eventually get married. To me, that had to raise a few doubts as to what had happened. But you go back to the evidence, and the evidence was there. Patricia had some sort of involvement in shooting John.
The second stop was John's financial situation and who would benefit if he died.
John had said that he had one insurance policy, and he said that at that time beneficiaries were his children. When we got the details of the insurance policy, the beneficiary had been amended and Patricia was the sole beneficiary of that insurance policy. So we then did a check on a registry of life insurance policies and they came back and said that there was another 4 insurance policies on John's life.
Mr. Asquith?
Yes. We then took the whole lot of the documents up to John, showed him each individual document.
These two?
He pointed out that it wasn't his signature on any of those documents.
None of them. We asked him, did he have any idea who may have done it? He said no. We asked him, would Patricia have done it? And he stated, no, there's no way in the world she would not have done that. The beneficiary for all 5 policies, totalling the amount of $275,000, was Patricia Byers.
It appeared Patricia Byers had stood to gain financially if John had died on the night he was shot. But in order to build a case against her, the detectives would firstly need to prove the documents were indeed forgeries.
In most cases, when a person commits the act of forgery, they try to reproduce what we call a pictorial representation of the genuine signature. When we compare the specimen signatures of John Asquith with the disputed insurance applications in his name, the first thing we see is there is some attempt at reproducing the pictorial likeness, those loops and whirls. But what they failed to do is to pay attention to the finite things that make up John Asquith's signature. That is, the fluency, the speed of writing, the complex formation of that particular signature, and the pressure of the pen on the paper. All the disputed John Asquith signatures fall down in all those areas. They were not written by John Asquith, and I was satisfied that all those simulated forgeries had been written or forged by the one writer.
And police believed that person was Patricia Byers. Not only were all the life insurance documents sent to the one mailbox address owned by her, but when detectives looked at the records at a medical centre where a checkup was required for one of the life insurance policies, the evidence kept building.
There was no booking at all for John Asquith. The only booking that was in there was for a Joan Asquith. She had a blood test taken and was given the certificate. And their carbon copy in their receipt book was also made out to a Joan Asquith.
It didn't take an expert to see that the documents sent to the insurance company had been altered.
So we compiled a photo board with a photo of Patricia, showed this to the receptionist, and the receptionist identified Patricia as the person who went to the surgery on that day.
While the detectives mounted a case of attempted murder, John Asquith continued to deny Patricia's involvement. That was about to change.
He'd gone to his own doctor, said he was feeling sick. The doctor did a urine test and they found that he had a large quantity of Valium in his system.
The circumstantial evidence against Patricia Byers was mounting, but police still hadn't been able to find the missing .22 caliber rifle they believed she used to shoot her partner.
My son Ashley was fishing and he noticed a rifle butt or a stock of a rifle. It's an unusual thing to find by the river, of course. And we heard about the shooting on the boat. We read about it in the paper the next day and we saw it on the TV on the news. Putting two and two together, perhaps it might have something to do with it. So we decided to hand it in to the police.
The finding of the butt was significant. It was the sawn down part of a .22 caliber rifle. But it was the fact that those who found it lived right next door to Patricia Byers that made it such an incredible find.
Well, I thought if the rifle stock was found there, and if she had sawn the gun down, that she may have thrown the barrel part in the back of the creek as well. I then made arrangements with our police divers, hopefully to try and find the barrel. I wasn't holding any high hopes.
Maybe you want to turn around and the shot, move it out of that thing.
They were only in the water 40 minutes and one of the divers recovered a barrel of a .22 caliber rifle.
I thought, fantastic, that was it, that's what we needed. The only other missing link to that part was the actual gun part itself.
The barrel was examined and seemed to have been cut. If that same damage was present on the piece of barrel retained on the rifle, this may have damaged or broken up the projectile or caused it to start to deform as it's left the barrel, or it may break up as it strikes an object such as the skull of Mr. Asquith.
I really think that that's the only thing that saved his life, was the fact that it shattered before it hit him in the head. Realistically, if she had cut the gun down with a hacksaw and done a straight cut, I don't think John would be here today. So I thought maybe she'd cut the thing down at the house. So I then took a search warrant out.
When we got to the residence, there was a large work shed and a vice on the bench in the work shed. The area was quite clean. However, underneath the vice, there was what appeared to be wood shavings.
Those shavings, along with the Winchester rifle butt, were taken to a timber specialist to see if the two were a match.
Starting with the rifle butt piece, we made a razor cut on the end grain of the wood piece to determine whether it was a hardwood species or a softwood, and it turned out to be a hardwood. Then we loaded into a microtome, which is a sliding knife. And the knife allows us to cut very thin sections along the 3 planes that we need. We stain that with safranin, and that highlights all the wood structure. And we can place it onto a glass slide to enable us to look at the wood anatomy under a microscope. It's a bit like fingerprinting in a way. All species have a different arrangement of the anatomical features. So we're able to look under the microscope and then key those features into a computer database, and that'll give us the possible timber types. In this case, the wood turned out to be Betula species, which is a birch. It's a northern hemisphere hardwood.
When the wood shavings were then compared, the result was what the police had hoped.
We determined conclusively that the shavings were Betula or birch, the same timber type and timber species as the rifle butt.
I think she cut the gun down at the home at Yatala and put it on the boat, had it there. She'd planned to go out that weekend. It was all going to happen on that weekend. And the only thing that went wrong was that John didn't die. He just stayed alive, and I think that wrecked her whole plan.
She was then charged with 1 attempted murder, grievous bodily harm with intent, unlawful wounding, and 11 counts of forgery and 11 counts of uttering a false document.
With all the evidence presented to him, John Asquith still couldn't believe that the woman he loved had tried to kill him. But 2 months after she had been arrested and was out on bail awaiting her trial, John changed his mind.
He felt really sick one day after Patricia had prepared him some lunch. And he said that he felt really drowsy and was bumping into things and couldn't stay awake.
He said he'd gone to his own doctor, said he was feeling sick. The doctor did a urine test and they found that he had a large quantity of Valium in his system.
He said that he was not on any medication and hadn't taken any medication since he left hospital. So she must have done it. She must have put something in his food. This realisation that John came to was like a bombshell to him. He just completely changed his attitude, and he realised that Patricia, the woman he had been living with and, in his opinion, had an absolutely wonderful relationship with, had been trying to kill him.
However, as police were about to discover, John was not the only man to have fallen under Patricia Byers' spell.
After a 2-week trial, a jury found Patricia Byers guilty of attempted murder. She was sentenced to 12 years, but was eligible for parole after 3. It was thought she would not reoffend. But for one family who had taken a keen interest in her case, the opposite was more likely to be true.
I received a phone call from a woman, a bit concerned in relation to her father, who had lived with Patricia Byers for a long period of time. And because of what she'd seen in the media, she then had fears for her father, because all the assets, the house, the cars, the boat, were all now in her possession.
I don't believe you're doing this to me.
Patricia Byers and Carl Gottschens had been a couple for 8 years, until, as his daughters learned, he had apparently walked out on Patricia on the 6th of July, 1990.
And they told us that when they hadn't heard from their father, they had phoned Patricia, and Patricia had told them that they had split up and that he was going to Thailand to be with his Thai girlfriend. She appeared quite emotional about this, was crying and teary, and appeared to be very upset about the breakup.
Everything's been taken care of? Sure. You go and enjoy yourself, eh? Oh, thanks very much.
According to his boss, Carl Gottschens was intending to see his Thai girlfriend and then return to work after 2 months. His boss had last seen him 3 days before his scheduled flight out of the country.
He asked me if I'd like to have a beer, and I was aware that things were probably a bit uncomfortable on the social scene, and I said, no, mate, I don't really want to walk into any domestics.
That's a real safe. Okay, yeah, thanks, mate. See ya.
They had sat in the car for a little while because Carl had been overpaid $1,000 in his wages, and they came to an arrangement that Carl would pay him back over a period of time or deduct it from his next pay.
It wasn't a big issue because he was a man of honesty and integrity. I shook his hand, wished him well, and said I'd see him in a couple of months when he came back from his leave.
He was quite surprised when, approximately 2 weeks later, he received a typewritten letter from Carl.
It was a resignation letter stating that he would not be coming back and that he had settled with Trish about his house, and in some ways he felt he may have made a bad decision, but he said he didn't believe Trish would be left on the shelf because she was a good-looking girl.
But there was no mention of the $1,000 Carl owed his employer. So his boss wrote back to him at the address Carl had requested all mail to go. His old place, now owned by Patricia. 3 months later, he received a cheque for the amount.
At that point, I figured, well, all monies had been paid, Carl had made up his mind, we'd send his gear off, and that was the end of the matter.
Our first step in trying to locate Mr. Gottschens was to try and confirm whether he had actually flown to Thailand on the date nominated. However, he never caught the plane.
I contacted Thai Airways and I was told that the flight had been cancelled by a woman purporting to be Mrs. Gottschens. She cancelled the flight and requested a refund.
All our attempts to locate him were to no avail.
The only hint that Carl was alive and well in Australia was the activity on his bank account and the purchase of a pergola for Patricia's place some 4 months after he had last been seen.
So if he had signed that, he was obviously still in Australia and still had some contact with Patricia. Or alternatively, somebody had access to his American Express card and had forged his signature on the voucher for payment for the pergola.
So I sent the letter of resignation from Carl and another letter with the ship logs, which had Carl's handwriting in it, to the document examination expert. The conclusion of the expert was that the signatures and the handwriting was not by Carl Gottschens. I also looked at what happened to Carl's assets, which included the house at Yatla, and found out that the house had been transferred to Patricia approximately 3 weeks after Carl had last been seen.
On the transfer document, the signature of Carl Gottschens and the signature of the witness were forgeries. The only genuine signature was that of Patricia Byers.
The American Express docket was also a forgery.
I went and interviewed the proprietors of the Pergola Company. The salesperson told me that he had attended at the address at Yatala, where he had met a woman that introduced herself as Tricia Gotchins, and signed the American Express voucher in front of him in the name of C.T. Gotchins.
Now, from a forensic point of view, this was absolutely brilliant evidence. We could then use the signature that Paddy Byers forged on the Amex transaction as a benchmark and compare that with all the other forged signatures that we had on all these documents and conclude that whoever signed the Amex voucher was the author of all the other forged signatures.
Police had circumstantial evidence, but they had no body, no crime scene, and no weapon. And their prime suspect was due out of jail in less than 18 months.
Patricia Byers was the classic black widow. She had attempted to kill her partner, John Asquith, to obtain wealth. And now it appeared she had already had a practice run with her previous partner, Carl Gotchins. And while a body had still not been found, police and the prosecutor brought into the investigation knew they were looking at murder.
Months before, about a year before, she'd secretly obtained a copy of his will.
The signature that requested the will to be sent had been proved to be a forgery.
And she knew that she had to share that house, those assets, with the daughters. So she wasn't going to get everything. And she knew that Carl had started up a relationship with a new woman in Thailand. She knew that he was going to be leaving her. She knew that she was going to lose the house. She was going to be left with nothing. So the night that Carl walked through that front door, he disappeared off the face of the earth.
The next step was to ascertain if there was any forensic evidence at the house. By the time I did the search warrant, 6 years had passed since Carl had last been seen. And I found a diary relating to 1990. And on the 6th of July, there was an entry. Carl left, dropped him in the city.
And on that same day, a new bed was delivered.
The bed just seemed strange. Patricia had told John Asquith that Carl had left her and taken his bed with him, and it had a smell about it. I mean, if he was going to Bangkok, you wouldn't take your bed with you. If you were going to Darwin to then go off to Asia, it just didn't make sense.
I was asked to focus on the main bedroom area, particularly to search for the presence of blood. We found a series of very small droplets on one of the walls. These ranged between 0.5 millimetre to 1 millimetre in size, and there was about 21 of these droplets. We performed presumptive screening testing of the stains for the presence of blood, and they all came up positive. We performed a luminol examination on the carpet of the room. This is another presumptive screening test for the presence of blood. The carpet was basically placed on top of the gyprock. There was no underlay underneath, which made it unusual in the fact that it was there in that sort of state. And what we obtained was a whole area of positive reactions on the timber chipboard floor under the carpet. Once we turned the lights back on and had a look at to see where these fluorescent reactions were occurring, there seemed to be areas of dark staining that married up with where the fluorescence was occurring.
A DNA profile was created from the bloodstains and compared to the DNA from Carl Gotchin's daughters. While it couldn't be confirmed, the blood in the room was consistent with coming from the father of those daughters. The pattern of the blood spatter was also of great interest.
Due to their size, it can infer that they were deposited as a result of a strong force being applied to a source of blood.
something such as blunt force trauma, or it could be from a gunshot wound. Gunshot wounds typically cause what's called high velocity blood splash, and that type of staining is very small, almost mist-like blood stains. These were very small, so it certainly couldn't be eliminated. Or it could be something as mundane as sneezing or coughing with blood in your mouth or nose.
The bedroom had all the hallmarks of being the likely place of where Carl Gottschens was actually killed. Couldn't say it with certainty, but it certainly looked like it. Obviously, the case would be significantly strengthened if we could find the body of Carl Gottschens. So how did she get rid of the body? There were, at least to my mind, two options. She buried him nearby to where she killed him, which would mean that she buried his body somewhere in the yard. Or alternatively, she took him out on a boat and dumped his body at sea.
When John Asquith commenced his relationship with Patricia, the house at Yatala was still in the process of being finished. So I interviewed him about when different things had happened to try and identify if something had occurred where a body could be concealed around the time that Carl went missing. From everything he told me, a likely place was the garden shed that he thought had been constructed about the time Carl disappeared. The shed was dismantled and the area below was excavated by the backhoe. I had hoped that we would find Carl's remains, but there was nothing found.
We had no body, no weapon, no definitive crime scene. But what we did have was substantial evidence that Patricia Byers had gone to great lengths to plan and conceal the death of Carl Gottschens. Each individual piece of evidence could not prove her guilt, but when it was put together, I knew you could put a very compelling case of murder to the jury.
Patricia Byers has pleaded not guilty to murdering her de facto husband. Carl Gottschens went missing in July 1990. Byers claiming he'd run off to Bangkok to marry his prostitute girlfriend. Prosecutor Paul Rutledge claimed all Mr Gottschens' worldly assets, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, have disappeared through a series of frauds and forgeries directly linked with Byers.
Byers' motive to kill Carl Gottschens: money. She knew that to get that money, those assets, there was only one way: forgery. But for forgery to work, Carl had to die.
After a month of hearing the evidence, a jury came back with a guilty verdict.
The verdict was welcomed by John Asquith, who fell prey to the Black Widow in 1993.
Naturally enough, I'm pleased to see justice done.
Until now, the jury was unaware that Byers was already serving 12 years in jail for that attempted murder. As a result of this verdict, Byers' future is life in prison.
Patricia Byers has the right to apply for parole in 2012. As a result of the two cases and her two convictions, rumours arose about the death of her first husband. Police investigated the car accident in which he died, but found no evidence to support the theory of foul play. For 3 days, members of the Milosevic family had been trying to contact Radmila, or Rad, as she liked to be called. But calls to Rad and her de facto husband, Tony, had gone unanswered. And for a family who spoke to each other every day, it was a matter of deep concern.
Rad! There was a phone call made from Tony's employer that he hadn't turned up for work for a couple of days, and they were quite concerned, as it wasn't like Tony not to be at work. The car was in the driveway and nobody came to the door, and Dara started to get a bit worried.
Dara was Rad's 18-year-old sister.
She looked through the window and noticed some paper burned around the stove, and the stove was actually glowing, the hot plates on the stove. She wanted to break the window and go in, but her boyfriend stopped her and told her that they would call the police and get the police there. He didn't want her to go in.
I was on duty in Canberra on the 31st of March 1984 with another detective, another young detective, and we were the only two detectives on in Canberra for that particular day. I received a call on the police radio from our operations room that the police officer in attendance had smashed a hole with his baton in the back door of the house and entered. There was a strong smell of petrol in the house. It was obvious that there was an attempt to set the place on fire. In one of the back bedrooms, there were 3 bodies, 2 adults, male and female, and a small girl. They'd been piled up and they'd been doused in petrol. And in another bedroom, there was a young male child, obviously all victims of gunshot wounds. We were only young people 20 years ago ourselves, and we all had young children as well, so it was pretty horrific, you know.
I was actually elsewhere with another sister, Rad's other sister, and we were in a nightclub at the time, and a friend had come up and said to the other sister that something terrible had happened to Rad and Tony, that we had to leave.
An entire family had been wiped out. Radmila Milosevic, her de facto husband Tony Baker, and their 2 small children, Danny and Lisa, were dead.
When they took us to Richardson, they made us wait in the car. The house was all taped around, and somebody had come out and told Rad's sister that they'd been shot and they were found in the house, Rad, Tony and the kids. She was just out of her mind. She just was screaming and so upset after going through it 2 years previously, losing Marion and Lily.
Tragedy had already struck the Milosevic family. Mariana and Lily, Radmila's younger sisters, died just before New Year's Eve of 1981 in a car accident.
You couldn't comprehend another 4 from the same family, Marion and Lily, and now Rad and Tony and the kids. It was just unbelievable.
The surrounding the case, they say, are extremely unusual. The police broke into this house at about 9:30 last night to find the bodies of a young man, a young woman and their 2 small children. The bodies were all in various parts of the house. There was no sign of any struggle, but kerosene had been doused on the walls.
There was no break and enter on the house. The house had been locked up. There were no broken windows. It was quite calm as far as that was concerned. And there was evidence that the offender had attempted to clean up blood stains with a bottle of Jif from the kitchen. And in their attempts to clean it up, they'd made more of a mess, so that the person just put cushions over the blood stains and sort of hid things.
The murderer also tried to hide his tracks by attempting to set fire to the house.
The stove consisted of 2 small hot plates towards the back of the range, and at the front of the range was a sort of a square grill-type hot plate arrangement. And the 2 back hot plates were glowing red hot, but not the front one. The person who turned the stove on had, in their haste, had turned all the knobs the same way, and the hot plate at the front where he'd stuffed newspaper around the grill didn't ignite because the switch was turned in the wrong direction. It was on low instead of high.
The scientific squad has been trying to piece together some story or pattern. They believe the shooting could have taken place as long ago as Friday.
But a search inside the house suggested it could have been earlier. The failed attempt to burn down the house meant that Radmilla's diary remained intact, a diary she wrote up religiously every night.
And it was just an old school book that she used to write up the day's events in. And the last entry was dated Wednesday, the 28th of March. And the entry was that her husband and a guy called Tomo were listening to the radio for the football that was on the midweek game. And that was the last entry. So we knew we had another person in the house at that time, the last time that the people were obviously alive.
This morning, from their mobile field unit, the police conducted a door knock, but very few of the neighbours knew anything about the family, and none of them had heard any of the gun blasts.
But people had seen a distinctive car travelling backwards and forwards to the house after the Wednesday. And we had some information there that indicated that perhaps that car might have belonged to the person Tomo. So we needed to find out who Tomo was and where Tomo was now.
Police investigations are continuing into this evening. They're still interviewing the family's friends and relatives, but haven't determined even a possible motive.
It had now been some hours since the bodies of Rad, Tony and their children had been found shot dead in their home. With no known reason as to why they were murdered, detectives needed to speak with the last person who had seen them alive. And that was a bloke called Tomo.
We eventually identified Tomo as a guy called Alan Thompson, who was a close family friend. In fact, he was a long-term mate of the male victim of the scene. I think they used to play football together.
He was my big brother. He was do anything for me, trusted him. I guess he was the big brother I never had, and he was one of the family. I think he actually taught me to drive at 13, 14 years of old illegally along the road, and he'd drive us to a school disco. He'd go home and he'd come back and pick us up when we were finished. So we were always with Tomo.
Other diary entries indicated that this Tomo had turned up on a regular basis and he would play with the kids, and there were some comments in there about him eating all of their food. So we knew that he was a regular visitor to the house. He was also a boyfriend of one of the two sisters who were killed in a road vehicle accident some years prior.
Tomo met Mariana one night. Him and a friend were chucking laps of the main street, and Mariana and one of her sisters were in the city, and they happened to pull over and start speaking to them and talking, and I guess it just went from there.
Before long, the young couple moved in together and were hardly ever seen apart. So when Mariana died in a car crash less than 2 years later, Alan turned to her elder sister Rad and her de facto husband Tony for company. Most of his days and nights were spent here at their house.
We also established that he owned a motor vehicle similar to the description of the one that the neighbours had told us about, that was coming and going from the premises.
So was Tomo a possible suspect, or simply the last person to see his friends alive?
My partner and I travelled to Queanbeyan and were actually greeted at the door by Alan. And when I introduced myself and said who I was, I'm the bearer of bad news. I said, I've just come from the house of your friends in Richardson. We found them all dead.
At the crime scene, ballistics experts had found spent casings and bullets that indicated the murder weapon was a .22 caliber rifle.
He was asked whether he owned a rifle. He took us to a shed in the back of his parents' home, where he unlocked it and produced a .22 rifle. And we came back to Canberra to police headquarters and handed the gun over to our ballistics expert.
All right. Check and clear? Great. Thanks, Eric.
They took us to the local police station, then proceeded to question us on Tomo, asking us if he had guns or if, was there any reason why, we would think that it would be him. And I just said, Tom, I wouldn't do it. Tom, I didn't do it. He wouldn't do something like that.
At the forensic laboratory, the ballistic expert fired bullets from Thompson's gun. Under the microscope at 20 magnifications, the bullets were then compared to those found at the crime scene to either identify or eliminate the rifle Thompson had given to the police.
What we're looking at is a test sample on the left-hand side and the exhibit on the right-hand side, and we're looking for lines that are created by marks that are left on the interior of the barrel and the land itself, and they emboss those particulate marks on the lands. They're a unique set of marks because they're like a ballistic fingerprint, so they're unique only to this one particular firearm, and that allows us to make an identification or an elimination. In this case, we've made an identification.
It was the following day that we had some information come forward from our inquiries that Thompson had gone to a petrol station in the outskirts of Queanbeyan and purchased a tin of petrol. That tin was actually found at the crime scene, and it was him coming back to the scene that the neighbours saw the car. So it became obvious that Alan Thompson was our offender, and we subjected him to interview, produced the evidence, and initially he denied any involvement in the murders of those people. But then he said, I went out to the car and got the gun and just come inside and just started shooting. But he said he didn't know what he was doing. He was just randomly firing throughout the house. Well, that didn't match with the scene that the ballistic expert had recreated. It was more deliberate firing and aiming rather than just shooting around wantonly and not knowing what you were doing.
As the bullet exits the muzzle of a gun, the pressure behind it blows gunshot residue through the barrel and into the air.
You can just confirm that's hard up against contact.
The closer the rifle to the target, the more concentrated the gunshot residue around the bullet entry hole.
Firing!
The further away, the less dense it becomes. So when the experts compared the results they got from Thompson's gun to the gunshot residue around the bullet holes of his victims, they were able to establish how far away Thompson was from each family member when he pulled the trigger.
Firing!
We established that, I think the ballistics expert established that the offender had first fired from the entry hallway of the house across to where an armchair was in the lounge room where the woman was sitting with the young girl on her lap. It's then that the husband started to lift himself up from the chair, and the offender shot him then in the chest, and he then tried to get out of the lounge room and he went around a small wall into the hallway, and he was shot then at point-blank range to the back of the head. And then the little girl who had obviously fallen off her mother's lap, she was shot in the lounge room on the floor from a short distance, and we believe that he dragged those bodies up the hallway then and piled them up in the back bedroom. And then at some stage that night, the male child was shot in bed at point-blank range. So it was a callous, outright murder.
24-year-old Thompson was charged with 4 counts of murder, but pleaded not guilty at the trial.
I didn't want to believe that Tomo did it. It was mainly sitting in court and listening to the evidence and the forensic evidence, everything that went with the case.
Thompson was found guilty and was sentenced to 4 terms of life imprisonment to be served concurrently.
And we never ever found out the motive for the murder. But I think following the death of his girlfriend, he sort of attached himself to Rad Miller, and I don't have the qualifications to talk about people and why they do certain things, so I don't know. I just think that there was from what I've seen and from what I've read in her diary, I think that Tomo was a little bit infatuated with Rad Miller for whatever reason, and she was rejecting that advancement.
But It wasn't over for Tomo. One policeman had a gut feeling that would likely turn Thompson into one of Australia's worst killers of the time.
Going through photo albums in the house, we found newspaper reports involving the deceased two sisters who'd been killed some years before in a motor vehicle accident.
The two girls, aged 14 and 17, died when this car left the road and slammed into a tree. They were incinerated as the car's fuel tank exploded.
An inquest found it was an accident. The car hit a tree and burst into flames. The driver, who escaped unhurt, was close family friend Alan Thompson.
The concern was if he had in fact got away with it, it resulted in the deaths of the other four. It should never have occurred.
When Alan Thompson gunned down Radmila Milosevic and her family, investigators discovered that he was also the driver in a car crash that took the lives of her two younger sisters. Was it sheer coincidence that Thompson's name was linked to the deaths of three sisters? Or was there more to it than met the eye?
Thompson alleged that he'd been driving towards Canberra, Coomera to Canberra, on the highway with the two girls in the car.
What about the ice cream party? Yeah, I have some ice cream. You didn't get that.
High beam of another oncoming vehicle caused him to veer off the road. He immediately got out of the car, the driver's side. He went to the front of the vehicle and saw flames coming from under the bonnet. He ran around to the left-hand side of the vehicle and attempted to get the girls out of the vehicle. He was engulfed in flames, and subsequently the two girls died in the motor vehicle accident.
I was contacted at work and said that Marianne and Lily had died in the accident and Tomo had been burned. Tomo had burns to his arms, lower arms, where he had tried to get the girls out. The day of the funeral, he was very withdrawn. He wouldn't speak to anybody. A few of us went up to put our arms around him and he more or less pushed us away and he was just very reserved. He'd sometimes wake up through the night screaming out for Mariana, and we just tried to be there for him.
2 months after the girls' funeral, a coronial inquiry into the crash found the deaths of the sisters to be accidental. But Rick Nines and his partner Tom McQuillan had their doubts.
Right, the brief told us that there'd been a motor vehicle accident, simple motor vehicle accident. Looking at the brief, there weren't sufficient answers to say, well, yes, this was a simple motor vehicle accident. There were questions that needed to be answered in order to corroborate his story.
We were very fortunate. The accident squad at the time took a lot of photographs of the vehicle accident, and when you looked at the photographs, I was concerned that the damage didn't correlate with the high impact alleged by Thompson at the time.
Travelling at the speed that he said he was travelling, one would have thought that there would have been a lot more damage, and there was insufficient damage.
Thompson said he was driving at 45 miles, or 60 kilometres per hour, when he was blinded by headlights and went off the road, hitting a tree. But according to experts from General Motors Holden, this could not have been the case.
Now, that was quickly diffused by the engineers who said that didn't hold water. They weren't happy with that story at all. And they looked at the photographs and they all put the impact speed down to about 15 mile per hour.
So that said, well, why would someone do that? Would it be to protect themselves possibly? And maybe the accident had been staged. So we decided to test our theory out that this was a staged accident and to see what sort of damage would occur by rolling the vehicle into a tree, because we didn't have the tree out at the site, it had been cut down.
So So we bought an HR Holden and we took it to the police driver training area and we got it on a slope. And we marked the distance between a tree that we believe met the dimensions of the tree and the highway, and then we ran the vehicle down towards the tree on a large number of occasions to get the speed right, and the distance had to be spot on to recreate the 15 mile per hour speed on impact.
We had it all planned. Everyone had their role. I think my role was to time it from memory. Rex was to observe. And we had a driver who was rigged up, all padded up, crash helmet light, ready to crash it in. But once he'd seen how far we were going down the slope and the speed, there was a little bit of, well, perhaps this might be a bit dangerous. So he sort of reneged, and it was left for volunteers, and the only volunteer left was Rick Ninnis.
Well, I believed it had to be done. Someone had to do it, so I was the man at the time, so I had to do it.
He was placed in the vehicle and sent off on his way and crashed it into the tree.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go!
But it was probably important I did do it, actually, because it gave me a feel for what actually transpired in that car. And the impact was not severe at all. You certainly knew you'd hit something, but it wasn't severe enough that you would think 2 people would die. So it was supported very much so that was about the speed the vehicle was travelling when Thompson hit the tree with the 2 girls in it.
In our minds, we had to be certain exactly what was going on. If we weren't certain, how could we show that to someone else? We did it because we had to know.
But while the similarities between the crash test and the damage to Thompson's car did put a dent in his story, it wasn't anywhere near enough evidence to overturn the original verdict of accidental death. For that, they would need to get answers from an arson expert. Had the car burst into flames? Or was it deliberately lit?
And they locked me up for a day in a room with the video and the photos and said, we'll be back at 4 o'clock, tell us what you think.
When Detective Rick Ninnis began his journey into whether Thompson's accident was indeed what he claimed, he never expected that he'd be putting his own safety on the line. And yet, it wasn't enough to prove Thompson was a fake or a murderer. His focus was now on the fire that incinerated the girls and how it really started.
The coroner's initial finding was that the fire had started under the bonnet of the car. An explanation for the fire was that there's a spring sitting across the battery to hold it down. It actually had contact with one of the terminals and arced, causing a spark to ignite the fumes under the bonnet. Now, photographs where the vehicle was on the back of a tow truck going away still indicated the headlights were on.
Now, that would seem a little bit incongruous if the battery is supposed to have started the fire. If you look at the damage in the engine compartment where the fire was supposedly started, you see some heat damage to the hoses and the wiring, but you don't see any actual burning. A lot of the wiring would be just bare wiring if it did survive at all, but you wouldn't have any insulation on the wiring. I'd expect the hoses and the fan belts to be burned away. They would have to for a fire to burn that long to get through the firewall. In fact, there are parts of the firewall that haven't been affected by the fire at all.
The damage from the fire seemed to be more inside the vehicle rather than in the motor. The motor seemed to be still in working order for a fire of that velocity. So it didn't add up. Why is there a fire inside the cabin, but yet the engine seems to be okay, and that's where the fire was alleged to have started.
Thompson had alleged that within minutes, seconds of him getting out of the car, the fire had spread from the engine to the passenger compartment. So, to corroborate or reject his story, the detectives decided to replicate the fire.
You got the stopwatch going?
Thank you, mobile board.
Time, yeah? Pretty good fire.
That's what we wanted.
Starting to drip through now at the bottom. It starts to drip
That's
off
got
now.
more oxygen food in it too.
We initially poured that petrol under the bonnet, what we thought would have been the amount spilled out of a carburetor.
There you go, Tom.
There you go. 40 seconds.
That petrol certainly did ignite after we put flame to the petrol, but it extinguished itself very quickly because it couldn't travel anywhere. And we subsequently added more fuel and kept trying to do it to try and get that vehicle to be engulfed in flames to a large extent. But you virtually had to douse that car in petrol to get it to ignite.
That's a bit more like it.
And it took quite an amount to be able to get it through the firewall of the vehicle and into the cabin.
You on, Tommy?
4.5 minutes.
The wiring under the dash, it's got to get that. Got to burn that away.
The dash is the thing that'll really start to smoke.
Cars will catch fire, but it's a fairly high impact speed that will do it to rupture all the fuel lines, the fuel tank, and to get it up and running to a high burning degree. You've got to have a lot of accelerant around it to fuel the flames.
15 minutes now. Yeah, 15 minutes.
So to support Thompson's story that in fact within a few seconds of the vehicle impacting he had a car totally on fire, but we couldn't establish how it would have happened. It just couldn't have happened the way he said it did.
But what we also found was that there would have been time for someone to get out. This was the other thing. That was the reason why the firewall was there.
You reckon you get one up inside the car at the 30-minute mark?
And by timing it, we thought, well, no, it just doesn't add up again. Another part of his story, not being able to get in. You should have been able to get in because it took us quite some amount of petrol to be able to say that the cabin would have caught fire.
45 minutes is up. Right.
In his original statement following the collision in 1982, Thompson claimed the container he was carrying in the car was empty. But when detectives Nines and McQuillan confronted Thompson with their doubts about his version of events,
Changed his story slightly, but only slightly, just enough to give us a reason why there was accelerant in his vehicle and why a fire should have occurred.
he told them that he'd bought the petrol for his mum's lawnmower in the afternoon and had forgotten to give it to her.
He said it was in the car and it must have fallen over and caught on fire.
Thompson didn't say anything at the time because he didn't want to get blamed for firing the car. So, were the detectives barking up the wrong tree? Or were their instincts right? The answer was right under their nose, but they were yet to see it. Alan Thompson initially claimed there was no petrol in his car the night his girlfriend and her younger sister were incinerated in a motor vehicle accident. 3 years later, he changed his story, saying he did have a container of petrol in the car and it must have fallen over. So, had Thompson lied because he didn't want to be blamed for the fire? Or had he perjured himself at the inquest for another reason?
If you look at a photo of the tree where the car was wrapped around the tree, you'll see that there's a fire below the level of the vehicle. Now, how could that possibly happen if the fire was in the engine bay? It's more consistent, and the photo actually shows this, of a flammable liquid spill running and burning down through the folds of the metal where the car's been damaged. Obviously, I can't say exactly how much petrol had been used, but what I can say is it would have to be in the order of litres inside and outside. So you're looking at quite a few litres of petrol spread around inside and outside that vehicle.
The case was getting stronger and stronger as we went, and we believe we were heading towards a prima facie case against Thompson.
But the most damning indication that the accident was a cover-up was hidden among the photos that had papered the walls of the detective's office for the last 6 months.
You can look at something for quite a long time and not notice something. And all of a sudden it hit us that looking at the females, we noticed that there was some unexplained fluid escaping from the skull.
One of the photographs had a distinct round hole in one of the skulls, and we kept looking at it. Suddenly we become very curious about this hole.
If you look at the photos very closely, it's not all that clear, but you can see that there's a lot of damage to the skulls. Now, it is reported both at crematoriums and I believe in the Russian Revolution that you can get skulls exploding in fires. And when that happens, it's mainly because the fire is very quick and very hot. There's tremendous steam pressure builds up in the cranium, and therefore only one thing can happen, the skull will blow open. Now, if you look at the skull damage in these, that's not consistent with that. They look to me like exit wounds of projectiles, in other words, bullets, and at least in one of the skulls, an entry wound that was very strongly suggestive that these two girls have been shot in the head.
In the Supreme Court today, the tragic story of 3 Canberra sisters unfolded. The Director of Public Prosecutions, Ian Temby QC, said merely the fact that Thompson had been convicted of the murder of one of the sisters was enough to order a new inquest into the deaths of the other 2. He said such an inquest would allay public disquiet and set the record straight. Mr Temby said new expert evidence contradicted Thompson's version of the crash, how fast he was going and where in the car the fire started. He said Thompson had now admitted he was carrying a container of petrol and previously he'd denied that. Dennis Palmer, for Thompson, said the evidence was not new nor of substance and pointed to the cost of holding a new inquest.
The only thing left to do was to exhume the bodies and see if there were any forensic evidence available from the bodies.
Now, if Thompson's story is right, there should have been burning or scarring of the larynx inside the bodies and the lungs of the young girls if they were alive, even though they might have been unconscious. You know, we certainly needed that sort of evidence to substantiate a charge to homicide against him.
That order was given, the exhumation was undertaken, and subsequently an examination of those bodies revealed gunshot wounds.
Bullet wounds were found in one or both of the sisters' bodies after they were exhumed from the Gungahlin cemetery.
Bullet wounds that were consistent with being from a .22 calibre rifle. The same calibre Alan Thompson used when he murdered the girl's older sister, Rad Miller, and her family.
At the post-mortem examination, the doctor found that there was no burning in the larynx or the internal organs, and established beyond doubt that they'd both were deceased at the time of the fire. Forensic Service also found that there was a coating of lead which was left behind as a bullet passed through the skull, inside the skull. So it totally supported the fact that the girls had been shot at or in the vehicle. They'd been deceased prior to the fire of the vehicle.
So in fact, by pulling that brief, just as out of mere interest for a start off, it just built. And it became a rolling ball for us, and the further we rolled it, the greater the divergence.
But what really went on the night the 2 girls were murdered? What triggered Thompson to shoot his girlfriend and her younger sister?
Leading up to the accident, Mariana came to work and spoke to her sister. It was basically the only time she really told us that she was scared of him.
Mariana Milosevic and Alan Thompson were boyfriend and girlfriend. When she died in a car accident, where he was the driver, Thompson turned to her older sister Rad Miller for comfort. 15 months later, he killed her and her family. With Thompson's name linked to both events, police and forensic investigators re-examined the car crash that had been written off as an accident. Alan Thompson's secret was exposed. And the truth of what really happened that fatal night was finally uncovered.
He's talking shit now. Can you just stop yelling at her?
I'll do what I want, all right?
Excuse me.
The younger sister had come over to stay with them for the weekend.
Why are you being such an arsehole for?
And there'd been some sort of pending separation. The young girl wanted to break off with him, and he really didn't want that to occur. We believe that the young girl was there to be a witness or support her sister in the breakup.
I think he killed the girls in the car because Mariana wanted to leave him. Mariana had come into work and said that, you know, he was starting to frighten and she was getting scared of him and she didn't want to be with him anymore. Maybe if he wasn't going to have her, nobody was. Why he decided to take Lily, to take Brad, to take Tony and the children, I don't know.
Well, there's a definite connection, a modus operandi on what he was doing in both murders. There was a 22 involved in headshots in the victims, and the fact that there was fire used in both occasions to conceal the crime. So we believe there's a distinct correlation between the two offences.
2 years after he murdered the family, and 4 years after the original inquest into the deaths of the girls, Alan Thompson was found guilty of deliberately killing his girlfriend Mariana and her sister Lily.
He fooled a lot of people. He came across as the nice guy, the caring guy, and the Milosevic family trusted Tomo. Tomo was like their own, but they knew after the Richardson murders that he was responsible.
Thompson was given a life sentence for each girl's murder, to be served concurrently with the 4 already imposed.
I got the most satisfaction when Mr. Thompson was convicted, because it was finalisation for the Milosevic family. I felt really, really sorry and deeply on their behalf, because he was a lady that had lost so many members of her family for no valid reason.
She lost out of her family 3 daughters, a son-in-law and 2 grandchildren. It was fairly horrific for one mother who fought and battled and brought those children up on her own all that time, to have this cove come along and just take them away like he did.
Life for them now is 20-odd years later, it's still like yesterday to them. I mean, I know that there's not a day that goes by that any of them that are left don't think of Rad, Tony, the kids, Lily, Mariana. He's really hurt them and really destroyed their family. My thoughts of Tomo are completely different to my thoughts of when I was a young teenager. I don't like him anymore. I hate him, I guess, as much as they do for what he's done to them.
In their own way, the family and Bronwyn have erased Alan Thompson from their lives.
Tomo's name was put on Mariana's headstone. It had "Loved by Alan." They believed then that she was very much loved by him and him by her, but the name was removed. It was scratched off.
We no longer exist for an eye in our society today, and you can't bring people back, you can't turn the clock back. But I think people in society today like to see those who are involved in those sorts of crimes to be punished.
Thompson has been behind bars for the last 20 years and is currently serving his time in a minimum security prison.
Hopefully, people like that should never be released back into society.
Alan Thompson's a cold fish with no emotion. There is nothing inside of him, I don't believe. Yes, the best description I could give you is just a cold fish.